Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of Back to Basics on the Business Edge, which is brought to you by Feliciano School of Business at Montclair State University. As always, and as most of our regular listeners know, at Back to Basics, myself and Professor Elias, George, we discuss questions and issues facing business practitioners. On today's episode, we're going to talk about relational and emotional connection, to communication. We're going to kind of continue our conversation in a different way what we started last episode when we had Gail join us. So again, in today's episode 9, we're going to focus on relational and emotional connection to communication. So George, how are you? How you doing?
Doing great, Mo. How are you doing?
I am good. I'm good, my friend.
Hey, listen, last conversation we had on episode 8 was just fantastic.
Wasn't it?
Gail was
Yeah,
wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. We got to bring her back.
absolutely.
I think that it was really good. So I really appreciate the conversation, and she was quite insightful. I really liked
Yeah,
some of the comments she brought to communication, and hopefully we can keep that going. I guess here we're talking about emotional and relational response to communication. And I know this is off the
yeah,
cuff a little bit, but and I'm not sure if you had the same experience. And I know
yeah,
we're talking about business here, but let me just talk about when I present and when I present at work. It's a very similar experience to presenting actually in class as a professor. And let me explain something that I do, and I was curious if you do it too. When I'm going into a an important discussion or important lecture that I've prepared for, I don't plan on every word I'm going to say. I plan on sort of topics. I might have
yeah,
I might have a phrase or something that I want to say a certain way on purpose, right? And if it's very important, I might even rehearse my communication or my pitch and my main points. But I often, even if I have a little bit of a script, I often don't give the same presentation twice the same way. And let me explain why. I actually feed off of the audience. And I can tell by the way they're communicating with me in terms of their body language, eye contact. Um, Sometimes I'll say something and somebody might shake their head a little bit, and I know that they don't get the point or they don't agree, and I make sure to emphasize that. Or if the audience isn't quite the makeup that I anticipated, I might adjust my style or approach for the audience. And I was wondering, Mo, if you do a similar thing when you're doing either a presentation in your consulting
mm,
or
mm.
when you're doing a lecture at school.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I'm going to give you like 2 examples. Yes, in lectures, definitely. I walk in. First, I look at the learning objectives that I have linked to the lecture that I'm doing on the day of, right? And the topic and how it links to the learning objective. But absolutely, depending on let's call them the audience, the classroom, the conversation can go in many, many different ways, depending on the level of engagement, the level of interaction, the response I'm getting. So absolutely. And I'll relate this even more to coaching. Same idea applies. I go in having my agenda, the points that I want to talk about, but based upon the personality type, the response I'm getting, the attention, the enthusiasm, the energy I'm feeling, I agree with you 100% that the actual words and the direction of the conversation, the length of the conversation, the words used, everything could change. It's you walk in with the core, what it is you want to discuss, kind of like, the skeleton of what it is you want to discuss, but the variables could change significantly the direction that you go in. Absolutely.
So something that you bring up, to the point, on the extreme side, I've had times when I've walked into, let's say, a mentor session where I'm mentoring somebody, very similar to coaching in a sense. There's maybe a slight nuance that we can talk about later, but
Mm-hmm.
coaching, mentoring is a very similar type practice, right? Very similar, even relationship in some ways sometimes. But there's times when I go in with an idea of what I think that person needs to hear or do or be, just based off the relationship we've built. And sometimes, things that they say or their reaction completely derails my agenda. And I find a need to pivot in order to do what they need out of that conversation. Does that happen to you in coaching as well?
It does, but I want to ask you a question because you bring up an interesting point, the way you started this. When you say, I want you to elaborate a little more to myself and the listeners. When you say you go into, and correct me if that's not what you meant, but when you say you go into the conversation knowing what the person needs to hear or what they like, what benefits them, that's kind of like what you said, right? I know I
Mhm.
didn't use the exact words, but that's based upon what? Because that's a really interesting point. What that when you say that it's based, what is it based upon that you know what they need?
So, let's say we've had, let's just say that this isn't the first mentoring session, and let's say
Mm-hmm.
I have an ongoing relationship with this individual. I will often reflect on the previous conversations that we've had. This person, this mentee, has shared with me maybe their personal or professional goals, and I will try to marry, their needs and their wants and where they are at
Mm-hmm.
with potential learning experiences or activities, or I might invite them to a meeting that they wouldn't otherwise be able to get into as a growth experience. I'll say, hey, come to this meeting. I know it's not exactly something you'd be invited to, but I want you to listen. I want you to
Mm.
hear the conversation.
Yeah.
Sometimes that individual might come in with something else that it turns out it's more important for them to figure out or focus on. And I will put my agenda away in order to address and be, I guess, more attentive to their needs. I mean, and I
Yes.
just bring that up.
Yeah.
I bring that up because that's part of effectively communicating and helping somebody if you want to be a caring coach or a caring mentor.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And now back to your question, to me, that is exactly what I do. I may come in with my mental notes, what it is I want to talk about and how to approach it, but it could totally change based upon the conversation that does actually take place and the response I get from my listener. And, which makes me think about one point I want to bring up, George, which is I feel like, and I'm using my business as an example because you know what I do with the coaching besides the teaching. It's all about people. It's all business. It's based upon my relationships with my clients. So it's all people based. I feel like in my line of business or a lot of, I think it could apply to any business, but I am not really building a business. My business does not exist without my clients. So I build client relationships, and those clients that I'm establishing those relationships, they are what define my business. They are the entity of my business. They are my business. So in other words, I build relationships with people to build my business next, right? Which goes back to what we said, I think in episode 1 or 2, when we said that every business is a marketing business that happens to sell a product or a service. So yes, the point behind what I'm saying is to bring it back home. Since my business is about people, the core of that relationship is communication and how I approach them, how I converse with them, the type of dialogue I have with them, which comes in first. And then secondary to that is the actual content that we're going to talk about. right? But it's really about that relationship with that person in front of me first.
So let me bring something up. I
Yeah.
recently finished an autobiography by Booker T. Washington, and he was really a fantastic orator as well as a teacher. But a portion of his book, he talks about how he gives lectures and how he gives lectures to very diverse audiences, and how he changes his approach based off of the reactions to the audience. Very, very similar to what you and I
Yeah.
were talking about. But the one thing he said that really would bother him, it really bothered him when he was giving a presentation, and I just wanted to get your sense on this. What really bothered him in the conversation is when he would give a lecture and somebody would just get up and walk out of the lecture, or get up and walk out of it talking, and it really bothered him. And
Why?
on, well, you know,
Did he
I
say?
think some of a little bit, but I'm gonna guess a little bit just based off how I feel about it, and I'm gonna see if you feel the same way. Actually, this is me testing to see if what's going on with me emotionally when I'm presenting is similar to other people, right? And I suspect in some ways there's variation, but I suspect that there is a little bit similarity. So, do you remember during the pandemic when we had to teach online through
Oh,
Zoom?
yeah. Yep.
So I I had a very difficult time lecturing at really much of a length, and I suspect most professors did, to a blank screen. I had so many students just turn off their cameras,
Yeah.
and without personal feedback, it's like you're being shut out. It's like you're being ignored. And maybe the students didn't feel that way or didn't do that intentionally, but if you can't get facial feedbacks or body feedback, and other feedback from the students, it's very difficult to know where to go and what to say. And now you're reduced to a script. And I think that maybe Booker T, because this is definitely pre-Zoom. I mean, right? It's like we're
Yeah.
talking pre-1900. In a sense, maybe it's the same way, right? It was the same feeling. Like that person was shutting themselves off to his ideas. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And I think it does. That was the feeling that I get, that it's a one-way monologue conversation where you're not picking up any cues as far as, the direction that you should be going in, which brings up a really interesting point. As a listener, which all of us are sometimes, we have to understand and appreciate, be it as a student, as a client, as a customer, that a big part of the conversation relies on our reaction to what's being said. We bear as much responsibility in the dialogue or the communication process as the speaker, right? We help guide that speaker in one way or the other based upon the cues that we give out verbally, emotionally, visibly, right? It's a big, big part of the conversation. It's a really good point that you brought up that example with the videos and the screens, because that's exactly what I think of. That the burden of the success of the communication falls upon both the speaker and the listener.
Mo, I really think you're hitting the nail on the head there. And let
Mm,
me kind of a more of an extreme case of this. So there's another book that you just reminded me of. It's called Crucial Conversations, and that's another
mm,
fantastic book. But one of the ideas that was really mind blowing for me is they bring up this idea of violence in conversations. And they define this thing called the violence in conversations as anything that inhibits a good conversation from happening. That you can have a conversation, but have you ever had a time where you had to have a very important, a crucial conversation with somebody, and it's like they're wrestling you, and they're purposely making it to distract you and making it so you can never get to that crucial conversation where you could actually bring about rapport or improve the relationship. And it's like the person has a sense that you're coming there with something important, but no matter what, they won't let you say it. Has that ever happened to you?
You're reminding me of my ex-girlfriend, George. No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
Oh,
No, but yes, no, it does happen. Absolutely. It does. In all seriousness, it happens at work. It happens at school. It happens where we're on polar ends, both trying to prove our point, and you're just not creating any environment for any healthy kind of conversation, right? Everybody's just like, yes, to answer your question, yes, absolutely, 100%. I've seen that happen before.
yeah. I mean, so I think the listener, I like the way you said it, that the listener has, you know, I don't know if you said it as much, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I definitely agree. The listener has a responsibility in that conversation, not just listening, but to help direct and through facial expressions, the body posture, maybe even asking clarifying questions in order to make sure there's a healthy, good dialogue going on. And the listener, if the listener doesn't get the information that they need, they're also at fault, right? And I think
Yeah.
I think that that's a different perspective. In fact, I would probably say, I know we talk about business here, but definitely from a school student perspective, if the student doesn't comprehend and doesn't get out of the professors what they need, at some point they're at fault too for
Yeah.
not, you know, for not asking follow-up
Asking
questions.
questions, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So I encourage the questions to come.
No, I agree. And you know what, too, now to bring it back again on the business side of our discussion, best example to emphasize the power of listening. You are the manager at the Four Seasons, and I'm one of the guests there, and I come to complain to you about something that happened. If you do not know as a manager how to properly listen to my complaint, it's a disaster, right? It's a disaster in the making, knowing that you have to take me away. Like, let's say I'm standing in the lobby yelling and screaming at one of the people behind in the helping me behind the counter, right in the lobby, and I'm standing there screaming and upset, and you hear this going on as the manager. The basics is you have to first take me away from that environment, take me somewhere else to kind of diffuse the situation. You have to listen, you have to nod, you have to agree, sympathize, right? So these are all arts of listening, not of talking. Those are all things related to being on the receiving end, not the one that's dishing out the problem. So it goes back to prove our point that be it in a classroom, be it in a work environment, the listener has a lot of responsibility in the success of the conversation or the issue at hand.
Yeah, you know, something that I wanted to bring up is really the emotional impact on listening as well. So, you know, so I
Tell
brought up
me,
that
what do you
example.
mean?
So I brought up that example of coaching or mentoring,
Yeah.
and how we would change the agenda or completely change it. You know, if I have a mentee that I believe is not emotionally ready to listen to me and to have make sense, that's the time that I will definitely for sure change my message and throw away my agenda and try to work on that mentee's emotional state. I'm sure that's a similar approach that you would do with coaching.
Yeah.
And I think it's a similar approach when working with a client that's very upset, right? You, at some point, you have to address the emotions that are going on before you can effectively communicate and speak truth and try to work on what's really going on. You know, you have to recognize that if somebody is having an emotional response, their brain may not be ready to listen to some other topic or something else. You know, you need to address the listener where they're at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good point. So paying attention to that emotion as far as their reaction to what you're saying, I guess kind of factors in. You know what I was thinking of? One of our early episodes when we were talking about emotional intelligence. This is one of them, picking up on those cues as far as the emotion, the reaction of the listener in front of you. Right?
Oh, absolutely. And it's to say, and people have different, EQs, emotional quotients, right? But I think it's something that you can work on. It's not like it's something that you have or don't.
Yeah.
I think, sometimes somebody comes at you emotionally. Sometimes you need to, instead of reacting immediately, there's little tools like, pause, take a second or 2 seconds before jumping in there with an equally aggressive or excited response, right? Take a couple of seconds. It's okay.
Yeah.
And think, what's the best for both individuals? What's best for here? What is going to resolve this? And oftentimes, the best thing to do is not to go at this person with the same force that they're exerting with their emotions.
You know what I'm thinking of now with everything that we're talking about? This puts an interesting twist, or it opens up some food for thought around video recorded lectures or video recorded trainings, video recorded orientation programs, video recorded anything, right? Where people are listening to something that's pre-recorded and it does not factor in any type of reaction from the listener, right?
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I
Like,
I hear you. And I have definitely opinions about that. I
I
think
know, that's why I bring it up, because I know we talked about it before, and I'm going to let you talk in a second, but to finish what I was saying, like, because I'm thinking in the direction with the technology that we're heading in, AI, everything that, that's causing a paradigm shift and will cause a paradigm shift in how we teach and deal with clients. And I know we talked about it before, that's why I wanted to share it with you again now. Go ahead, what were you going to say?
so. I'm okay with certain educational modes that are static and not
Yeah.
dynamic. Like for instance, I am not going to sit here and argue against a good book, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there are good books, and there's books that have been good for thousands of years, and they're the same good book, the same literature, and you can read it over again, and it's almost alive, even though it's static. So I think that there are certain types of information that can be done in a static manner, meaning it's pre-recorded or pre-written,
Yes.
and it's consumed in a static manner. But I also think that there's value in a dynamic discussion. So I'm part of a couple of book clubs, and we read books, and they're wonderful, rich books. But then I have a lot of value in discussing the ideas of those books with other people and communicating. And I believe that even though I thought I understand a book very well, sometimes through conversations with others, they'll bring up points that I'll even feel like I understand it even more now after having that good conversation with a smart friend.
Yeah, and by no means am I belittling or discrediting, those types of learning or communication modes. They're needed. They're needed, and they have their benefits. I think what I was thinking about too, to clarify my point, is when the listener is choosing to get lectured or educated or learn about something through those types of means, they have to understand that it will take some discipline for them to actually modify their listening behavior to understand that they cannot give any kind of cues or feedback to the person that's giving the lecture, so to speak, right? They just have to have the discipline to hear it out.
So let me just say, say again, right? So I agree that there are things like books, pre-recorded lessons, things like that can be aided in the educational process, but it's not the end of the educational process. So for instance, I wouldn't think somebody would really be good at learning how to cook by being handed a bunch of books of recipes, right? Oh, here's the recipes, now cook, right? That's something that takes years of practice and mentorship in order to learn how to really be a fantastic chef, right? You can't just read a recipe. But then the people that have learned, they can go and they can read the recipe, and in their head, they can even mix the flavors together and imagine what that dish is like, right? The same way that somebody who's played music for years and years and is a professional musician, they can look at sheet music and they can hear the notes in their head. Or someone who does it with chess, plays chess. My brother at one was so good at chess, he could play chess on a sheet of paper. He was just writing the moves on the sheet of paper. He didn't need the board or the chess
to visualize it. Yeah.
And so again, I think that there's a goodness in certain levels of certain types of education and static, but I don't think that, for instance, university lectures purely through video are necessarily the best way for students to learn how to be able to apply or use the ideas that are there. You have to have other things that help the student apply what they're learning and what they're listening to.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I know there's people out there that will disagree and say, no, well, you know what, I got my whole degree online, or people that will say, I learned a whole language online. There's different schools of thought around all of this, but I do 100% get your point that human interaction part needs to be present at some point, preferably earlier on in the process, so that people do have that solid foundation that you can't just get by reading something. You need that human angle to it. But you know what? This is probably a conversation to continue, George, right? I know there's a whole many points that we can discuss under this umbrella of communication, but you know what? Let's keep going with communication next episode, George. All right, let's keep going with it and see where it takes us.
Yeah, I think we should keep going with communication, and maybe we'll even bring Gail back or another guest speaker to help us with some of these ideas, because I can't emphasize enough that a lot of people have ideas about business, but a lot of it is communication. A lot of it is working with other people.
Oh yeah, so 100%.
It's so critical. But yeah, I think that would be a great idea with communication. So that sounds good for you, Mo?
Sounds good, my friend. Sounds good.
All right. So, well, thank you all for listening to this episode of Back to Basics on the Business Edge, brought to you by Feliciano School of Business at Montclair State University. We hope you enjoyed this podcast and welcome any feedback you have for us, including suggestions for future topics.
Thank you, George. And as always, it was fun and interesting. And thank you all for listening, and see you next time on Back to Basics podcast.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.